This is Fresh Air. I'm Terry Gross. My guest, André Leon Talley, is famous in the fashion world and beyond. He spent much of his career at Vogue magazine, becoming the fashion news director in 1983 and creative director in 1988. From 98 to 2013, he was editor-at-large. He's a large man who covers himself in capes and caftans made for him by some of the world's top designers. He has an outsized personality, too. Now in his mid-60s, he looks back on his life in the new documentary, The Gospel According to André. He grew up in Durham, North Carolina, in the Jim Crow era. His grandmother, who raised him, was a maid for the men's dorms at Duke University. The fashions he was exposed to as a child came largely from what people wore to church on Sundays, until he discovered Vogue magazine. Reading Vogue was considered a most unusual preoccupation for a 9-year-old boy. After getting a scholarship to Brown University and a master's degree in French literature, he moved to New York, worked at Andy Warhol's magazine Interview, and was mentored by former Vogue editor Diana Vreeland when she was a consultant to the Costume Institute at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. André Leon Talley, welcome to Fresh Air. Let's start with, how were you introduced to the world of fashion?
Well, from an early age, I discovered fashion through the pages of Vogue. I went to the public library in Durham, North Carolina, and I was about 10 years old, or maybe 9, and I discovered this magazine called Vogue. And in those days, it came out on the 1st and the 15th of every month, and the editor was Diana Vreeland. And this was my escape world. When I was a young boy, I grew up in my grandmother's home in Durham, North Carolina, a modest home. She was a maid at Duke University, and it was just my grandmother and myself. She was an extraordinary woman. She was a frugal woman, and she watched her budget. She had a bank account, and we had a wonderful life because I never knew anything but love, unconditional love.
So you're a 9-year-old boy, and you're totally fascinated by these fashions that adult women are wearing. So what captivated you as a 9-year-old boy about the world of Vogue?
The world of Vogue meant more to me than what the women were wearing as models. The issues of Vogue captivated me not only for the images of the fashion spreads, but it was the magazine itself that turned me onto a world that I did not know or had not been exposed to. It was the world of literature, what was happening in the world of art, what was happening in the world of entertainment. It was a gateway to the world outside of Durham, North Carolina. It wasn't just the fashions. Of course, I love the fashions. I love the beautiful images, and I related so much to the images and then the written words, the captions, the articles. So I was living through Vogue as an escape hatch, but reading every single page, loving every single detail. I mean, they had a men's column called Men in Vogue, and that was very fascinating to me. Then Maxime de la Falaise had a cooking column. That was fascinating to me. And then, of course, the main spreads, they were all orchestrated by the great editor Diana Vreeland, and they were basically built on her fantasy, but she just gave me the world. I discovered Truman Capote. I discovered the great ballerinas from the Bolshoi, who defected to the West. I discovered Nureyev in the Avedon photos. Nureyev was nude, photographed by Richard Avedon. All of this was just very exciting to me. And it was a world that I internalized and I kept to myself as a young man because no one was interested in Vogue or fashion other than I. And I was ripping pages out of Vogue, putting the pictures up on my wall in my room with thumbtacks. And I just had a room wallpapered from head to ceiling, floor to ceiling, with images from Vogue.
So just to set the scene, while you're entering the world of Vogue and very much wanting to live in that world of fashion and literature and music and art. Yeah, so describe the actual house you were living in.
But my grandmother's house was very modest. It was a house of 4 rooms, a kitchen, living room, 2 bedrooms, and 1 bath. And we did not have central heating. I remember we had coal heating when I was very young, and then we converted to gas heating. We had a gas stove in the front bedroom where I slept, and then we had a gas stove in the kitchen, which heated up my grandmother's bedroom. But this house was a house of immaculate cleanliness. My grandmother was a great, great housekeeper. She gave me the chores of scrubbing, the front porch, scrubbing the floors. I had to scrub the floors once a week. I learned to scrub the floors. I also learned to polish the woodwork in the living room with Johnson's paste wax, CRA paste wax. That was hard so I could get the floor to shine. And I did this as a young man. And all the time, my grandmother was going to work to be a maid. She'd come home at 3 o'clock every afternoon, make supper. We'd sit down and look at the one little TV we had. My father had bought the TV for me from Washington, D.C. We had a black and white television. And I remember in the house, the stove was a very great memory for me in the kitchen because of the smells from the kitchen were wonderful. I remember my grandmother making wonderful lemon pound cakes and the smell of vanilla extract, McCormick's vanilla extract.
Oh, yes.
The color of the vanilla extract and the smell was amazing. Still lingers in my memory.
So, were you bullied when you were in high school?
Of course I was bullied. I was bullied and beaten up and everything.
What was your defense?
I would get on the school bus and I would say something and they would just pounce on me. Because also I had beautiful clothes. I didn't have a lot of clothes, but my grandmother and my father would put me in the best clothes they could afford. And I had beautiful sweaters and trousers and beautiful penny loafers and quality shoes. And I didn't show off. I wasn't a show off. I wasn't showing off. But I would just get on the school bus and I was tall and skinny and they just would beat me up.
So was there a way you could defend yourself?
I only defended myself through silence and not being a disruptor. I didn't fight back. I didn't know how to fight back. And I didn't know how to articulate this to my grandmother or anyone. The boys were very nasty to me. I remember once I built a snowman. School was out because of the snow, and it was a beautiful snowman in my yard. And this Reginald Hinton, he's dead now, he came into the yard and destroyed the snowman once it was completely built, you know? He just crushed it. Another time, my friends, they were cranky and naughty. Bruce, my best friend, built a ditch and covered the ditch over with grass and had on my best cowboy outfit I'd gotten for Christmas. I had on a very beautiful cowboy outfit my grandmother got me for me, and I put it on, and I was running around in someone's backyard. And Bruce, I was supposed to chase Bruce, and Bruce ran in the direction of this covered ditch, and I fell in the ditch, and I tore a hole in the trousers of my cowboy outfit, and I never put it on again. But then Bruce became my best friend. I think Bruce was the only man, the only young guy that was really a close friend. And my father liked Bruce, and I liked Bruce, and he's in the documentary.
Okay, wow. So I want to kind of collapse a period of your life here. So you
collapse it, darling. Yeah,
so after you graduate high school, you go to college. Then
yes.
you move to Rhode Island to go to Brown University for your master's.
Yes.
Your undergraduate
Yes.
and master's degree, both
I got
in
my
French
undergraduate
literature.
degree in French literature. And I tell you, when I went to Brown and won that scholarship, the world opened. When I got on the train, I went to Brown on a train from Durham, Raleigh, Durham. I took the train. My uncle went with me. He rode with me to Philadelphia. I had all these boxes on the train. I had huge boxes and things I was taking to Brown. It was the first time ever being away from home. So I went to Brown alone. I went to the campus alone. I navigated my way alone. And I got to Brown and the world opened up. The world of exposure, the world of literature, I discovered even more. The great, great poets, Baudelaire, Rimbaud. I discovered the beautiful paintings of Eugène Delacroix. I discovered Manet. I discovered the great worlds of art, things, music. Classical music had not been a part of my upbringing. Gospel music and church music. And in the world of Brown, I discovered beautiful classical music, piano music, Chopin, Clara Schumann. Things like this were really new to me, and I was so curious about everything, and the people were so sophisticated at Brown and at RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design. So I just had the world open up to me in just ways that had never been open to me before.
You know what? I realize you are one of the few guests I've had who talks even faster than I do.
I'm talking fast, but I'm loving it. I hope you understand it.
I absolutely understand, and I'm quite enjoying
Okay.
it. So you get to New York after graduating from Brown, and you'd always wanted to meet Andy Warhol and the people who he helped make famous. And you not only got to meet them, you got to work at his magazine, Interview Magazine,
Yes.
which I should say parenthetically just filed for bankruptcy.
And closed.
And closed, yeah.
It
So,
folded.
so when you were there and got to see all of the like Warhol superstars and everything, What made the biggest impression on you in terms of your own life, in terms of your own personal and professional identity? Because you were in your early 20s, I imagine, at the time, and it's a very formative period when you're still, shaping who you are and figuring out who you want to be. And you're looking at all these people who kind of remade themselves, who transformed themselves into something else.
I loved it. I loved the world. Now, the people that I met through Warhol were the people that I always wanted to know. They were not bullies. They did not judge you. There was unconditional admiration, if not love. People were free. People had made their choices. People were different. Some people perhaps had better clothes than others, but everyone was noted for their own worth, their own gifts. And I think that's why I felt so good, because I felt at home. I felt that I was part of a special club at Andy Warhol's Interview magazine. And they embraced me, and there was no criticism of me as it would have been at home in Durham, North Carolina. I was brought up in a very strict, modest home, but the nucleus of my family was church. So being a black man brought up in the African-American Missionary Baptist Church culture meant that I had certain rules and certain ways to deport myself through clothes, and not only through my actions or attitudes about life. But when I got to meet Andy Warhol, and people were walking around in jeans and blazers and sometimes Rive Gauche and sometimes not Rive Gauche, the world came through the doors of the factory in Andy Warhol. Interview was the gateway to the world for me.
Well, another thing about the Andy Warhol crowd is that there was a lot of gender and sexual fluidity.
Gender and sexual fluidity, but it wasn't rampant and it wasn't overt. People went into the office and there was a deportment about going into the factory. You had a certain culture of the office and the factory, which was very correct, very traditional, yet very relaxed and casual. There were all kinds of people. There were lesbians, there were gays, there were straight, there were drag queens, there were artists, but everyone was equal. So everyone mattered, and no matter who you were, it mattered. You mattered because you had individual gifts and talents, and that's what Andy admired. Now, there wasn't a lot of sexuality going on. I did not see people having sex rampantly at work or taking drugs, because it wasn't that atmosphere. When I got to the factory, it was long after Andy had an assassination attempt. So the rules changed. So people were chosen for their seriousness and chosen for their possibilities to become who they wanted to be. And I was allowed to become who I wanted to be at the factory and with Andy Warhol.
Right. So eventually you get to Vogue. You were a man at Vogue. You were also an African-American man at Vogue.
Yes,
so
yes.
I'm sure you stood out. Did you feel like you were with your people, or did you feel like you were
bullied.
separate?
I felt that I was on top of the world. I felt that I was with the best people. After all, Vreeland had endorsed me. I had the full endorsement. It was like if you had a political endorsement, it was the full endorsement of Vreeland and Andy Warhol, who were, for me, the king and queen of New York. The Empress of Fashion had endorsed me. I had proven to her, I had assignments and challenges she gave me for certain installations in her shows, and I had proven to her my worth. I never feared anything. I never doubted myself once. I am a deeply insecure person for many reasons. I never showed my insecurity. I just rose to the occasion. I stood up straight and tall, like a tall sunflower, and I just radiated the light and the beauty of my mind in relationship to the world of fashion.
So at Vogue, you eventually became, in 1988, creative director. What is the job of the creative director?
Well, that was a very gilded title, but in this gilt-edged hell, it's gold-plated hell, according to Tennessee Williams from Sweetbird Reviews. I knew the gilt-edged hell I was going to. The creative director is the person that's there to buttress the editor-in-chief. And it's sort of like a vice president, you know what I mean? A very high position, but there's the president and the vice president, and he's there or she is there to support the role and the policies and the vision of the editor-in-chief. It's there to give assignments, there to give ideas, to create ideas for the fashion pages, and come up with ideas for shoots, maybe not always received, but you just had to talk a lot. You had to talk a lot and be there all the time.
What are some of the...
You had to go to lunch, too, with very important people.
And what was the
Bill
point of the
Blass,
lunch?
Oscar de la Renta.
What was the point of the lunch?
Lunch, to make social networking with Bill Blass and Oscar de la Renta.
Why was it important to social network with them? What did you need from them?
They were top designers in New York, and you had to have a relationship, establish that relationship with Vogue, so the Harper's Bazaar wouldn't get that advertising.
Oh, I see. Because they needed you. I mean, but you needed them for the advertising. But that leads to a question. In the fashion world, I'm often really confused in fashion magazines about where the line is between advertising and editorial.
Well, it's more blurred today than ever before. Now, we were working in fashion. They were not blurred. The advertising department was separate from the Vogue department. And this is why Vreeland was great, because in her decade of being editor-in-chief, she never gave a whit about what the advertisers said. She invented what she wanted as a fashion spread. She invented the fashion spreads that were fabulous, cinematic, based on famous films. I remember when she did a whole spread of clothes by Queen Christina, Greta Garbo's great film, on Verushka. And there she had the designers like Oscar and Bill make costumes or evening clothes that were inspired by Queen Christina. Now, that was a very, very definite line between the advertising and the editorial. Now the lines are blurred more and more because it's more and more difficult to get those pages secured on an annual basis. So it's more of a stratagem where the advertising has slowly ebbed its way into the fashion editorial department, and they lean heavily on making sure that you get the right credits. Sometimes they say, well, we got to have this dress in because they've taken out 6 pages of advertising for the September issue. Now, that happens in every magazine.
Wait, let me stop you there. So they've taken out 6 pages, and what are they asking you to put in the magazine?
Well, the advertising department must come and say, well, please, you've got to put this particular designer in your editorial, because remember, they've taken out 6 pages, whereas you might have 5 dresses from a man that didn't take out advertising. You might want to do 5 Alaya dresses because his dresses are so great. But then the role of the advertising department is to stay on the backs of the editorial department and to remind them, well, remember, you have the advertising of Bill Blass, and he's taken out 6 pages, and you've got 6 Alaya dresses you want to run on these pages. We've got to honor Bill Blass for his advertising commitment.
So you have to do either a feature on Bill Blass or showcase his
designs in an essay that you might have included 6 dresses by Alaya.
Were you comfortable with that blurring of the line between advertising and editorial?
One is never comfortable with that blurring of the line, but one has to live up to the responsibilities and demands of the job. One is never comfortable. The luxury of true editorial is very rare in any fashion magazine, but one has to honor the commitment to create the dollar that pays your salary, that gives you food to eat.
Is fashion different because the advertising and
it is very
the content,
different today.
It's all the same people? Like the people who you're writing about are the same people who are taking out the advertising?
No, the content is different because the advertising is more demanding. The advertising is bigger, so they can demand. I remember once Estee Lauder, the late Estee Lauder, was very upset because the Vogue issue had come out at Christmas, and they said there were 3 great queens of beauty empire, and they were Helena Rubinstein, Elizabeth Arden, and Paloma Picasso. And Paloma Picasso at that time only had a lipstick, and it was called Mon Rouge, and maybe she had a scent. And Mrs. Lauder called up to the heads of Condé Nast and said, all my advertising will be removed. And not only from Vogue, but from all the other magazines, because she was an empire. Estee Lauder was an empire. And that was revenue that was going to be yanked out of Condé Nast. And Anna went to send me straight down to Palm Beach, Florida, to do a major profile on Mrs. Lauder.
Wow.
To make up for that slight.
So I have to say that is not exactly emblematic of what journalistic ethics are supposed to be.
Well, I mean, it's not the New York Times. And
no,
it's not the
exactly.
Washington Post.
Yeah.
It is fashion.
But the thing is, I think a lot of readers really can't tell the difference anyways between advertising and editorial because...
Well, you have to have an intelligent and sophisticated eye to tell the difference because it's more and more blurred. Most fashion magazines that are worth their metal usually are full of advertising pages, and those pages are almost created like editorials anyway.
Exactly.
So it really doesn't make any difference whether you're looking at the advertising page or the editorial page. Sometimes they blur all into one. Most of the great magazines do that nowadays.
So one of your contributions in terms of personal style to fashion is your capes and your caftans. How did you start wearing them? And I should say these are not ordinary capes. These are like amazingly designed, like sometimes out of fur.
Articulated fur and just thought out and processed with the great class, world-class designers. Well, when I went to Marrakesh and saw that the men in North Africa, in Marrakesh and Casablanca, walked around in caftan shirts and loose fitting clothes all day, every day. They woke up, they put on their long-sleeved to the floor, ankle shirts to the floor. They had caftans, and this is the indigenous dress of the black man in Marrakesh. And I decided I want to be like that. I want to wear that instead of a suit because it's comfortable, you're ventilated, you're roomy, you're cozy, and you can just stretch. And I'm not a tall stick anymore. I'm a big guy of great girth. And people think I look like maybe my clothes don't look that important, but I have taken great time in fittings for my capes and caftans made by the great designers. So I will continue to wear these things to the rest of my life.
Did your weight have anything to do with wanting to wear capes?
Absolutely. Absolutely. My weight issue is an ongoing thing. It's an ongoing battle. I battled it. I battled the bulge of the biscuits, 540 calories. At the Duke Diet and Fitness Center, I go there ever often, almost every other year. It's a place where I go, and it's disciplined. But I've had weight issues, and of course my weight issues are obviously go back to my childhood and the loss of love, and I associate food with love from my grandmother's home, the modest home in the kitchen. My grandmother used to make me a pan of biscuits every Sunday morning just for myself. And you don't know how wonderful that smell is of those hot biscuits with butter and molasses. I have carried that throughout my life. She would make lemon pound cakes. At Christmas, we have fruit cakes, chocolate cake, coconut cake, lemon pound cake, 4 or 5 cakes, 6 pies sitting, waiting to be eaten on Christmas Day for the family.
But you were skinny as a young man, so something changed.
Something changed when my grandmother died. It was when my grandmother died, I started eating for love, and I just don't know how to discipline it. I'm sorry. Everyone in America is perhaps overweight, and I totally empathize with people. I feel very bad, but I did select caftans at a certain age, and my suits, my beautiful custom-made suits, are put away because the caftans create a stately, tall image. You can look great in them and look slim.
So one of the things you mention in the new documentary about you is that you've never had a long-term romantic partner, and that you were, very preoccupied with your profession and loved your profession very much. Have you reflected a lot on why you think you never went in that direction?
Upon that. I reflect. Well, I was, as John Furstenberg, who's a dear friend of mine, said, I was afraid to fall in love. I was afraid of the rejection. I was afraid of emotional commitment, and I was not deliberately making the navigating through the shores and chiffon trenches of my career. It just wasn't a part of me, because although I lived in a world of great promiscuity and libertine ways in the 70s, Studio 54, Paris, and I discovered the freedom of people embracing people for their individuality or not just their sexuality, that you could be gay, you could be quadrisexual, or pansexual, as Janelle Monáe says. I just loved living the life that I living through the world that I was exposed to on the front row from fashion and bonding with people that I could have conversations with. As you remember, I was living in the life of an only child in a home with my grandmother. So we didn't have many conversations. I didn't have much to say to my grandmother, except that she only read the Missionary Helper, her Bible, and the newspapers. And she didn't have a cookbook. She never cooked from a recipe written. All her recipes were in her head, or borrowed from her sisters verbally on the telephone. She grew the most beautiful geraniums. She had rows and rows of clay pots with geraniums every year on the porch, roses in her rose garden. Everything was done by instinct or rote. So I didn't have much to say to my grandmother, and I was very quiet. And so I didn't have people to talk to. I was very much alone in my childhood, except for Vogue. And Vogue was a world, it was like Alice in Wonderland almost. I'd just gone down the rabbit hole into this world of glamour through the pages of writing, the spoken, written word. The word mattered as much as image.
How does that relate to not having a partner?
Well, I didn't have time. As John said, you were afraid of relationships. I was emotionally afraid of people, so I did not want to get close to people. I did not want people to touch me. I didn't like to touch people. So that is just a part of who I am, and I regret to this day I have difficulty responding to physical emotion. And it's based on, I guess, a childhood experience. I don't know what it is. I can't relate to that. I can't think about that now. But I do regret not having that relationship. I regret not having siblings. And I think about it almost every day because as I get older, it's very, very lonely. I live a lonely life. I live in my own guilt, gold-plated hell. As Tennessee Williams says, I know the gold-plated hell I'm going to. And I invented this gold-plated hell, and now I must live in it. I have a beautiful home. I have beautiful books, beautiful furniture, beautiful art, beautiful music. I love movies. I have beautiful clothes, but I live in a gold-plated hell. However, I am not going to say it's the worst life. It's been a wonderful life.
You know, you're talking about how you were quiet when you were growing up and alone, and you're so gregarious and so talkative and so easy to talk to. It seems like two different André Leon Talleys.
There is two different André Leon Talleys, as I said. Of course there are two different André Leon Talleys. Because I have someone to talk to who's listening to what I have to say. And I didn't have that when I was growing up. I was very much a silent person. I was afraid of people. I went through high school thinking no one liked me, and then I realized people really adored me in high school. I mean, I have great friends who come to me recently, a friend that I lost contact with, and I recently found out where he lived, and his name is Barry Parker, and he lives in Garner, North Carolina. And I just didn't think he liked me in high school. I considered him a friend, but then I contacted him, and he considers me a close friend, and we're very close now. It's just amazing how I went through high school thinking I was an outsider. And I didn't discuss that with anyone. I had no one to discuss that with at home.
Well, people were beating you up also, so you had every reason to think you were an outsider.
Yeah, I was an outsider. I was an outsider with class and style, and I knew that I had style. I knew that I had style based on something very strong. I remember when I would see Ed Sullivan and the great talents he would have, like Tina Turner, Ike Turner, James Brown. Those people impacted upon me. Ike Turner had a big belt, and I wanted a belt just like that. I remember he was on the cover of Ebony magazine on 1971 May, and he had this big belt and a red sweater with no sleeves and plaid trousers tucked in the boots, and I wanted to look like Ike Turner. I didn't want to be like Ike Turner beating up Tina Turner, but I wanted to have that look.
I hope.
Those looks I aspired to. I wanted to look like a pirate, and I dressed like a pirate.
So you talked about how you were afraid to be touched. You didn't really want to be touched. I'm wondering if the AIDS epidemic had anything to do in reinforcing that feeling.
Well, the AIDS epidemic did not. I was not afraid of people with AIDS, but I was very aware of AIDS. And I was very aware that AIDS could take you out, and you had to be careful. When AIDS started, people were getting sick with sarcoma, Kaposi sarcoma. Is that correct?
Kaposi sarcoma.
And it was very mystery. It was very new to us. And I was reading everything I could about it, and people were dying and going away. And I thought, this is very, very heavy. So this is another moment to pull back from people. And I never really, really, really got involved with the people, ever. I had great emotional experiences, contacts with very strong people. These people are wonderful. I've had more emotional and physical contacts with women than with men. And I will not name the women, but they have been famous women. So there you are. That's all you need to know, Terry.
Okay, that's good enough for me.
We're not talking about that anymore.
Oh, that's good enough for me. Okay. So during the course of this interview, you've mentioned your father and your grandmother. I don't think you've mentioned your mother.
Well, my mother, she was a part of my life, and my father and mother divorced when I was 9 years old. And my mother was very much in my life. Her name was Alma Ruth Talley, and she died in 2015, I think, 2014, 2015. She's buried in a cemetery, and beautifully, the ornament of the grave markers, I've spent a great deal of time designing it, and it cost a lot of money. And her funeral service was one of the most beautiful services ever at the Mount Sinai Baptist, and I spent a lot of time designing it. I spent a great deal of time, and Dr. Butts flew in and gave the eulogy for her funeral.
Calvin Butts?
Calvin O. Butts III. I flew him in, and he gave the eulogy. And so I do respect my mother, and I had a relationship with my mother, but I'll just tell you why you haven't spoken so much about my mother. When I was at Brown, this will just give you a story, and then we're going to stop. I'm not going to say anymore.
Okay.
I was at Brown, and I came home for Christmas, and I was wearing a ankle-length navy blue naval officer's coat with gold braid on the cuffs that I'd bought at a thrift shop. It was a maxi coat. That was the equivalent of a maxi coat. But it was to the floor with gold buttons, gilt buttons, naval coat. It didn't cost a lot of money, but it had a great deal of style, and it was very heavy. It was very warm. And my mother and I, we got out of the car, and you had to walk to the church. It was about maybe 100 feet. And my grandmother had gotten out and gone to church before us. She was very sprightly. And so my mother looked around at me and she said, well, you have to wait and walk behind me. I can't walk in church with you. I said, why? What's wrong? She said, well, I can't be seen with you with that Phantom of the Opera look. And I said, okay, well, I'll just hold back and you go on in the church and I'll just come behind you. So I was maybe 24 and I realized this is my mother and I must respect her. But this is the mother who does not get me. And thank God for my grandmother.
When your grandmother died in 1989, did she have a clue how successful you'd become?
Oh, she was very proud of me. She was indeed very proud, very proud. She had a great clue. She knew. She spoke to Mrs. Vreeland. She knew I was on the top of the world at Vogue. She was very proud.
Did you dress her at all?
Oh, yeah, of course I did.
What were good grandmother clothes for her?
Well, good grandmother clothes were not necessarily clothes, they were accessories. And in the summer, I would go to Garfinkel's when I was a park ranger in the government, the park ranger at the Lincoln Memorial, and a park ranger at the Fort Washington. And I would go spend all my money on gloves, kids' loft, leather gloves, for my grandmother to wear to church, black leather gloves. And I'd buy her beautiful Corée handbags, K-O-R-E-T. These are all the bags and things I discovered at Vogue. And then I would buy her sometimes shoes, but I was not big on shoes because I bought a pair of the very expensive alligator shoes once on a very high heel, a thick high heel. And I remember she did not wear them much, and she didn't want to hurt my feelings. She just didn't wear them much, and I realized that I made the bad choice because the heels were too high. But she loved all the things that I bought. I bought beautiful hats, and Karl Lagerfeld used to give me beautiful fabric from his collections at Chloe, and I would take the fabric home, and she'd have beautiful dresses made, and those dresses are still in my closet. And then finally, when I got to be big at Vogue, I would buy Chanel suits from the ready-to-wear and give them to my grandmother to wear to church. And she loved them, and she was very proud. A navy blue suit and a pink suit.
All right. It's been a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you so much.
Well, Terry, it's been a great pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much.
André Leon Talley is the subject of the new documentary, The Gospel According to André.